Now welcome to another lightning response video, where this time the question comes to us from Darth Rage, who asked, "Hey Thor, do you think nostalgia is good or bad for movies? To me, nostalgia is a form of bait to lure people in, whatever a company wants people to buy into. Nostalgia makes people feel excited. Unfortunately, it wears off and people see the flaws. And the worst part of nostalgia is we aren't moving on, we're just stuck in the past. For Star Wars, the sequel trilogy was more of a nostalgia trip with no story, character development, or doing something different. When I heard the Emperor's laugh in Rise of Skywalker, I was excited, but then I took a step back and realized his return doesn't make any sense. Marvel is also suffering from a nostalgia trip by using the multiverse to connect all non-MCU Marvel movies with the MCU. It's exciting to see where they are going with or old characters in the MCU, only to discover there is no plan, they are just there because. Do I need to bring up Netflix's Daredevil in She-Hulk or Hugh Jackman reprising as Wolverine in Deadpool 3? And quite honestly, when it comes to nostalgia being good or bad, it pretty much all boils down to just one thing in my opinion: character arcs. Is there an actual good reason for the story to bring certain characters back and to use them again? Or is it just being done to, shall we say, sell a story and be a cash grab? And not to insult anyone's intelligence here, I know most of you know what they are, but for those who maybe hear the term all the time but don't quite know what it means, a character arc is essentially the journey a character or characters take during the course of a story. It's them starting out at point A one way and reaching point C at the end, in a sense having improved or changed into someone different because of the events of the story. Because of what happens at point B in the middle there, and how they deal with it, how they deal with all the things that go wrong or the struggles they must face. That, in the case of the protagonist or main character, it usually makes them better in some way at the end, or sees them overcome something that seemed impossible to overcome at the start. And because a movie, barring those that plan for sequels, but because a movie almost always ends with the protagonist changing for the better after a completed journey of some sort, it can be quite difficult to carry on that character's story. There's a reason why sequels tend to be not as good as the original, and that's because they have to, almost artificially you could say, they have to carry on a story that was never intended to be carried on, one that was complete for the character. And so oftentimes what they'll do is sort of revert the character back to a former version of their self, which just feels off. It feels off to take a character through the same arc all over again, like they learned nothing the first time around. The Force Awakens is sort of an example of this when they revert Han and Leia back to previous versions of themselves, with him being a smuggler again and her an all-for-the-cause general in a resistance, and they also separate them from each other. Though why the film does that is kinda beyond me. It doesn't really serve the story or their arcs at all to separate them, beyond having a reason for Han not to immediately take BB-8 back to Leia to instead go to Takodana to meet with Maz Kanata, and for a big action set piece, where we'll then also get to have this big reunion between them for a cheap, unearned, emotional moment. Though of course Leia is not the only thing Han is separated from in this film. He's also separated from the Falcon to have another cheap, unearned, emotional nostalgia moment, and even one they could put into the trailer to get people super duper excited.
Julie, we're home.
And so yeah, absolutely, nostalgia can be cheap and gimmicky and just horrible for a story or horrible for character arcs. However, it's not automatically that way just because you bring back a character from a previous part of a story, even one who has a good, completed, and near-perfect story arc. Not if there's still somehow a story left to tell with them, another arc that they can be taken down, or if they can be used in a meaningful way for someone else's story. For example, a lot of people want to call Anakin's return in the Ahsoka series nothing more than nostalgia bait, and this is one that I can kind of see both ways because, on the one hand, I absolutely think bringing him back for Ahsoka's story not only makes sense, but it was something that you can even argue needed to be addressed on some level. Anakin is that important to this character, and showing her kind of close the door on him in a way wasn't a bad thing. However, you could also argue there were better ways of doing that than actually bringing in Anakin Skywalker. For example, a conversation between Luke and Ahsoka after or during a first meeting, them discussing Anakin with him telling her what happened in the end, how he came back to the light and saved him and destroyed Palpatine. That could have potentially led to something very profound and more impactful for both characters than what the Ahsoka series did, and it could have started a bond between these two characters going forward. Furthermore, and on the other hand, the way they then used Anakin in the Ahsoka series felt, well, very nostalgia-inducing, didn't it? It felt like they went into it looking for an excuse to go back to the Clone Wars in a flashback, and to have Ahsoka have to fight Anakin and or Darth Vader just because. Because it was cool. Like, it wasn't so much what would be the absolute best thing for the story and for Ahsoka's character arc, but what would generate the most interest or the most buzz on the internet to, again, sell the story. And one of the big problems with the Ahsoka series is that it didn't feel like there was much of a character arc for Ahsoka, for the main or titular character. None other than the one they almost sort of artificially put in there, this idea that Ahsoka fears falling to the dark side because of Anakin training her. I guess that could be a fear of hers, but we've never really seen her even remotely tempted to do anything dark side-ish. Nor does she have any attachments that might lead her there, other than the one they failed to use or capitalize on, that being the promise made to Ezra to find him, which isn't an attachment per se, but it could have been used as internal conflict for the character. It could have been a start of a character arc. Though speaking of looking for a reason to fight Darth Vader, clearly something very similar happened with the Obi-Wan Kenobi series. It had the same problem of having something cool as the whole premise for making the story or making the show. That being Kenobi and Vader fighting again. The biggest red flag with that series was when it was announced, when they right away said it would feature the rematch of the century, that it was going to be the selling point. It was then we should have known, and many of us did, that it wasn't going to be a very profound story about Obi-Wan Kenobi. It wasn't going to be any sort of true introspect. It was simply going to be an excuse to get the spectacle of Vader fighting Kenobi all over again in order to hopefully sell Disney Plus subscriptions, which is where the real problem comes in when it comes to nostalgia, right? That, as I've said before, Disney didn't pay $4 billion because they care about the story of Star Wars. They paid that kind of money to use the story of Star Wars, to use all the characters and ideas that people already know and love to make even more money off of it than what they spent, obviously. No one at Disney cared if Kenobi versus Vader made sense or not for the story, or if it did any damage to the characters or the character arcs. They only cared if it made them money. And yeah, there are certainly fans out there who ate it up. There are those who liked the series only for the new duel between Vader and Kenobi, which, hey, I guess like it for whatever reason you want, but don't fool yourself into thinking it was a good story when the only reason it existed was to again get these two to fight once more in order to get you excited, not to truly do anything for these characters, but just to make money off of nostalgia. And it was the same sort of thing with bringing Palpatine back in The Rise of Skywalker, how that made no sense whatsoever. They only cared that it might help them salvage the last part of the trilogy after the previous film kind of dead-ended the story by killing off Snoke, as well as having Rey reject Kylo Ren and essentially defeating him for the second time in 2 movies, which meant it was going to be hard for him to carry the final film as the main antagonist when the main protagonist had already beat him twice. And make no mistake here, Palpatine coming back made 0 sense story-wise, and that's because of the character arcs, because Palpatine's story was done and over with. He had a great start in the prequels and a fitting end in Return of the Jedi, and also it damaged Anakin's character arc to bring Palpatine back like that too, to imply that he, Anakin, sacrificed himself to only temporarily destroy Palpatine, that he didn't really fulfill the prophecy of the Chosen One, that actually it would be Rey and all the Jedi who would do that. So basically, yeah, for me, whether or not something should be labeled nostalgia bait or not is a simple question of, does it actually add something to the story? Does it further a character arc or not? Be that the one being brought back or one that can benefit from the return of that character? Or does something about it feel hollow? Are they only returning to get fans excited, to get them to open up their wallet, and to put something in a trailer that gets them to lose their minds and to go and watch it or pay for their subscription or whatever it might be? Is it all about the money or is it all about the story? Well, that's all I got for you this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you think about this one. What makes something nostalgia bait or not? Or you can always ask a question for a future lightning response video. Just start your comment off with "Hey Thor" and then ask away. Whatever you choose to do, leave a comment below. Let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.